Hi, it's Lee, and welcome to the Tesla Economist. I don't think Tesla will have a monopoly on electric vehicle sales. In this video, I will outline how I currently think the EV industry will play. My views are continually evolving. I don't decide on one outlook and then attempt to reinforce it continually, especially when we see things in this industry move so fast. In investing, it's dangerous to be married to one idea and then use confirmation bias to continually reinforce it, until when you finally come to realization you were wrong, it's simply too late. And this is actually something we witness firsthand with some of these Tesla shorters, or haters, for how long they have been grasping at straws in order to provide evidence of their theories on Tesla. They just don't seem to be able to let go. A lot is happening in this industry, and a fortune is being invested from all over. Battery factories seem to be going up at exponential rates, and sure, they took time to build, but it's years later now, and they are nearing completion, and many other new fabs are up and running already. The industry is by no means sitting still. The world has seen how profitable Tesla can become, but it took Tesla many years to reach that. So many other companies think they can reach something similar too, and they can leapfrog many of Tesla's various steps due to having significantly more capital to start with. So I just want to discuss how other BEV manufacturers will succeed, although I'm still hesitant to call them actual competition relative to Tesla. I'm doing what I can to put down my Tesla fanboy glasses and look through this as objectively as possible. So for you other fanboys out there, don't get too upset if it's not within our usual Tesla narrative. I suppose I'm more humouring the possibilities. Don't get me wrong, I think Tesla will take a large part of the market share, more so in some nations than others, and will be the largest global BEV producer. I think it's possible the Chinese domestic electric market may eventually collectively have a larger share than Tesla. I'm not entirely sure that BYD will actually overtake Tesla with a larger market share in China, at least not for the BEV market. However, China like to be clever and call them NEV, new electric vehicles, which is when you do include the new version of electric vehicles, called battery electric vehicles, and then add the old versions, called hybrid. And then they can say they are winning in this made-up, arbitrary NEV industry, which makes them feel better. On top of that, China also include miniature EVs, like the Wuling, which also skew statistics. Despite them costing around $4,000, they're still included into the same segment as Tesla. On top of that, they're not actually taking away much market share of ICE cars, more so motorbikes. So although it may look like China's EV market share is expanding faster than other nations, this has been somewhat skewed by statistics. Basically, it's a lot easier to make EVs, or NEVs, when you only have batteries with about 10 kilowatt hours. A better portrayal would be the actual market share of kilowatt hours deployed in vehicles to give a better representation. It seems that the Chinese government want to show that China is the future and ahead of the rest of the world, that their way is better, similar to how the Soviets were competing with America to space and the moon. Capitalism versus communism. Except NASA was actually a government-owned enterprise, so it was kind of like socialism versus socialism in that regard. If it was capitalism, then it would have been against SpaceX. But now the battlefield is which nation can electrify their nation's fleet the fastest. China are doubling down again and again on their iron phosphate cells, and they can make them at rapid speeds, and they can get their factories up and running much faster than the US. China also offers subsidies on all the NEVs sold in the nation, provided they meet the requirements. And so far, China has given out the equivalent of around US $15 billion in EV subsidies since 2009 and was meant to end in 2022. But the subsidies have been dwindling over that time. However, it sounds like due to COVID reducing sales, they are extending it until 2023, which happens to be the year that the US will start their new EV incentives. It's almost like we have another battle here again. The US don't want to look like they're losing to China in innovation and still want to be the world's leading nation. Now, compare China's $15 billion in subsidies with what I estimate to be perhaps US $500 billion in subsidies. Although I think Congress might have a lot lower budget on that, they might not have carried a 1 or something with their math, or they might have just totally underestimated Tesla, or possibly both. Yes, a $7,500 incentive to buy a North American-made electric vehicle, along with further incentives to produce batteries and cells too. Oh, and solar, which is not mentioned much at all. This may seem like a massive waste of taxpayers' money, And of course, additional printed money, aka inflation, or a further tax on the poor. And it's arguable that the poor are paying for the middle class to have a new electric car. However, in the US, I see it very unlikely that Tesla won't have more than a 50% market share. No one is coming in there remotely close to Tesla's level. Fremont already produces more cars than any other factory in the continent. Then look at the size of Giga Austin. The Chinese will likely focus on easier markets and concentrate more on their domestic market. Trying to compete with Tesla on Tesla's home turf will be tough. They'll face import tariffs and won't receive the subsidies, which would be a massive barrier to entry. Or if they build locally, then the factories will take a lot longer to build than in China, so that would likely be a 2 or 3 year delay, and then they'll lose their advantage of the low-cost, efficient Chinese labour and low cost of running factories in general. In the past, many a company has tried to enter the US only to fail. It's a tough market, especially if you're foreign. A typical American is much more likely to buy a local American-made product over a Chinese product, or a product from another nation, hence why the iPhone has majority market share. For example, BYD would not be able to make their vehicles to close to what Tesla could in the US. In other words, they'd be offering a vastly inferior product with a brand with minimal appeal, especially compared to Tesla, and likely couldn't undercut Tesla anyway. And they couldn't get any serious production for about 3 years from when they started. So perhaps by 2026 or 2027, if BYD went really big in the US, they could get to about 1 million vehicles a year perhaps. Well, can we begin to imagine what level Tesla would be at in the US by then? GM and Ford started years ago, and it's still going to take them that long to hit 1 million. And they know the US business practices. It would be too risky battling Tesla on their home turf. Like I say, BYD and the Chinese have much easier markets to focus on, ones that care less about drive quality and more about price, where they can actually be competitive. Americans love their cars. This is the mistake that Henry Ford made. He figured cheaper is better. Just keep getting the prices down. And he did. He managed to get the price of a Model T down to $260 from about $850 through manufacturing advances and massive vertical integration, perhaps arguably to a level even further than Tesla has taken it so far today, even attempting to grow his own rubber for the tyres. Especially now with its inflationary Inflation Reduction Act, Tesla may double down even faster in the US, as of course this act will backfire and have the opposite of the intended consequences, i.e. help Tesla rather than the competition. I mean, they're only up against Ford and GM as far as domestic competition is concerned, with targets of about 1 million units a year by 2025, if everything goes to plan for them in an industry they are new to, which didn't even go to plan for Tesla, in an industry that they are the masters of. Europe is obviously the other major market. It sounds like Tesla Energy is really what needs to be expanded there, but Tesla are mainly focusing on their vehicles in all markets, as that is simply where there is so much more profit, at least at this time. Of course, the electric vehicles will mean more demand for energy, and thus more demand for Tesla's energy business. Now, Europe has a bit more competition when it comes to electric, and a lot of them seem to be ahead of the curve compared to the US manufacturers when it comes to electric. They seem to be taking it seriously. Also, Europe is not Tesla's domestic market, unlike the US. A German will understandably feel more comfortable on their local brands, like Mercedes. There are a lot of German cars that have prestigious brands that consumers are willing to pay more for, which means they can cover the costs of their battery and perhaps still make a profit, at least within time. However, Tesla is still the #1 selling EV in Europe. Oh, and #2. And this is pretty much just from Tesla's China factories. Wait until they start getting their German factory running. It looks like Tesla will also dominate Europe too. What's interesting though, is there are no Chinese manufacturers, even in the top 10 in Europe yet. In fact, as far as I can tell, not even in Norway, except for the Polestar, Norway being a nation with no domestic auto market to protect. Then there are the other markets like the rest of Asia, Australia and Japan. I think the Chinese EVs have a chance in Asia and Australia. Perhaps Korea might be a bit tougher due to some strong domestic market, but other nations that want lower cost EVs, it may be more likely. Japan is going to be difficult, even for Tesla. Toyota is the largest company in the country. Tesla have a relatively small presence there still too. It's early days still in the EV industry, as it takes so long to ramp up cell production and increase the bandwidth, but the big boys have commenced. Mercedes intend on securing 200 gigawatt hours a year of cells, and many other legacy companies have similar levels. It will all add up, and when consumers stop buying ICE, they need to turn somewhere. Tesla can't supply everyone. And although companies like BYD may not be able to offer relatively good enough cars for most consumers in nations outside of China, I think they will succeed on their home ground. And although I still don't believe China's EVs will dominate the market, a narrative I seem to be alone on compared to the majority of the community, it would appear that China may dominate on their cell supply. I think BYD have a chance of being big in Europe too, but perhaps not with their vehicles, maybe more with their cells. The Blade cell is great technology. They're already selling them to Tesla. I think it inevitable they partner with more legacy manufacturers. I think Toyota could possibly be one, if they know what's good for them. BYD don't make a net profit on their BEVs, but they certainly could make a good profit selling their cells. CATL is getting huge. They will keep expanding and building more factories, like this massive 100 gigawatt hour factory they're planning in Hungary. To conclude, Tesla looks set to simply dominate all markets. The Chinese EVs will likely succeed in their domestic market and a few others, but the market share Tesla leaves is the major developed nations will be consumed by the legacy domestic market. Tesla's market share will be highest in the US. I'm not sure if there is enough room for Ford and GM. They may even have to merge and consolidate. Tesla's market share will likely be lower in Europe, and the Europeans are making the necessary efforts. I think the electric legacy vehicles may struggle entering the Chinese market too, and have simply focused on protecting their home turf. They have large enough local markets and governments to help. It's likely not all legacy companies will make it, and some may merge, but Tesla won't be alone. However, I think as far as Tesla investors are concerned, I would quote Dan Ives when he said, "It's Tesla's world and everyone else is paying rent." Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.